Maple Ridge, a small town tucked away in the rolling hills of Vermont, was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business. The Sinclair family had long been the backbone of the town. At the heart of the family was Jacob Sinclair, the family's patriarch, a man known for his charm, business acumen, and commanding presence. He was the eldest of 3 Sinclair brothers, and his success in real estate had made him one of the wealthiest men in Vermont. But behind the facade of the perfect family man was a darker side, one that would eventually lead to unspeakable tragedy. Jacob's younger brother, Charles Sinclair, was a very different man. Charles was quieter, reserved, almost a shadow compared to Jacob's charisma. He had always lived in the Sinclair estate, helping to manage the family business, but never venturing out on his own. Charles was intelligent, even brilliant in some ways, but there was something about him that unsettled people, a brooding intensity that made others keep their distance. It was in the summer of 2008 that the Sinclair family's carefully curated image began to crumble. That was the year Jacob's niece, Emma Sinclair, moved back to the estate after the tragic death of her parents in a car accident. Emma was 19, young, beautiful, and completely unaware of the darkness lurking within her family. Emma had always been close to her uncle Jacob and his family. After her parents' sudden death, she was taken in without question, returning to the Sinclair estate where she had spent so many summers as a child. Jacob, along with his wife, Evelyn, and their 2 children, welcomed her with open arms. But as much as she loved them, there was something about returning to the estate that felt off. The mansion itself was a Gothic masterpiece, dark, sprawling, and filled with centuries of family history. The walls seemed to whisper with old secrets, and the shadows in the long hallways felt alive. Emma's room was in the far wing of the house, isolated from the rest of the family. It was here that her relationship with her uncle Charles would take a turn that no one could have predicted. Charles had always been kind to Emma, but there had been something about his attention that made her uncomfortable. As a child, she had dismissed it as him being overprotective. But as she grew older, she began to sense that his interest in her went beyond that of an uncle. At first, she thought she was imagining it as lingering looks, the way he always seemed to be where she was, watching her with a quiet intensity. But as the weeks went on, it became harder to ignore. One night, unable to sleep, Emma wandered downstairs to the library. The house was silent, everyone long since gone to bed. She found Charles sitting by the fireplace, reading a book. He looked up when she entered, his eyes locking onto hers in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. They talked for a while, about nothing in particular, but there was a tension in the air that neither of them could ignore. Charles, always reserved, seemed to open up to her in a way he never had before. He spoke about his loneliness, about how he'd never felt like he truly belonged in the family. Emma, feeling vulnerable and lost herself, found comfort in his words. It was that night that their relationship crossed a line. What began as a simple conversation quickly escalated into something much darker. Charles, unable to control his desires any longer, kissed her. Emma, confused and overwhelmed, didn't pull away. And in that moment, the boundary between uncle and niece was shattered, and the affair began. Over the next few weeks, they became more reckless. They would meet in secret, hiding their relationship from the rest of the family. Emma, young and naive, believed that Charles truly loved her. She convinced herself that their relationship wasn't wrong, that it was just the result of 2 people finding solace in each other after tragedy. But deep down, she knew the truth. What they were doing was wrong, and it could never end well. Evelyn Sinclair was no fool. She had always been the one to hold the family together, to keep Jacob's temper in check and maintain their public image. So when she began to notice the way Charles looked at Emma, the way they disappeared together for hours at a time, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. At first, she tried to dismiss it as her imagination. But as the weeks went on, she became more and more convinced that there was something going on between them. She confronted Jacob about it one evening, but he laughed off her concerns. Charles would never do something like that, he told her. He's family. He loves Emma like a daughter. But Evelyn couldn't let it go. She started watching them more closely, piecing together the subtle signs of their affair. The stolen glances, the secretive smiles, the way they always seemed to be alone together. It was all too much to ignore. She knew she had to do something before it tore the family apart. It was a rainy night in late August when Evelyn finally decided to confront them. She had been waiting for the right moment, and when she saw Charles and Emma disappear into the library together, she knew it was time. She followed them, her heart pounding in her chest as she approached the door. What she saw when she opened the door confirmed her worst fears. Charles and Emma were locked in an embrace, completely unaware of her presence. Evelyn stood frozen in the doorway, unable to believe what she was seeing. When they finally noticed her, the room fell silent. What the hell is going on here? Evelyn's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. Charles and Emma pulled apart, both of them looking guilty and terrified. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Charles, always the calm one, stepped forward. "Wait, Evelyn, this isn't what it looks like," he began, but Evelyn cut him off. "Don't you dare lie to me," she hissed. "I've seen the way you look at her, the way you've been sneaking around behind our backs. How could you do this? She's your niece, Charles." Emma, tears streaming down her face, tried to explain, but Evelyn wasn't interested in hearing it. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, her mind racing with what to do next. She knew she couldn't keep this a secret Jacob had to know. When Evelyn told Jacob about the affair, he didn't believe her at first. He couldn't. The idea that his own brother could betray him in such a way was unthinkable. But as Evelyn laid out the evidence, the truth became impossible to deny. Jacob was furious. His brother, the man he had trusted his whole life, had not only betrayed him but had done so in the most unforgivable way. And Emma, his beloved niece, how could she have allowed this to happen? Jacob confronted Charles in a fit of rage. The argument that followed was explosive, filled with accusations and years of pent-up resentment. Charles tried to defend himself, claiming that he and Emma were in love, but Jacob wasn't having it. The fight escalated, and in a moment of blind fury, Jacob lashed out, striking Charles across the face. Emma, who had been listening from the hallway, ran into the room, trying to stop the fight. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The Sinclair family was broken, and there was no going back. In the days that followed, the tension in the Sinclair household reached a boiling point. Jacob, unable to forgive his brother, demanded that Charles leave the estate immediately. But Charles refused, insisting that he and Emma were meant to be together. The night of the murder was one that would haunt the town of Maple Ridge for years to come. It was a stormy evening, the kind of night where the wind howled through the trees, and the rain battered against the windows. Inside the Sinclair mansion, the family's final confrontation was about to unfold. Jacob had been drinking heavily, trying to drown his anger and betrayal in bourbon. When he saw Charles and Emma together in the hallway, something inside him snapped. He grabbed the family's antique hunting rifle from the wall and stormed towards them. "What are you doing?" Emma screamed as Jacob raised the gun. Charles tried to step in front of her, but Jacob was too fast. The gunshot echoed through the mansion, followed by a deafening silence. Charles fell to the ground, blood pouring from his chest. Ma screamed, dropping to her knees beside him, but it was too late. Charles was dead. The Sinclair family's fall from grace was swift and brutal. Jacob was arrested for murder, and the trial that followed captivated the entire nation. The details of the affair between Charles and Emma shocked everyone, and the media latched onto the story of betrayal, lust, and murder like a pack of wolves. The Sinclair family, once revered in the town of Maple Ridge, was now the subject of nationwide scrutiny. The trial not only exposed the scandalous affair but also the dark and twisted dynamics within the family. It was a story that everyone wanted to know more about, and for months, the media coverage didn't let up. Jacob Sinclair's trial for the murder of his brother Charles became one of the most sensational cases Vermont had ever seen. The courtroom was packed every day with reporters, locals, and curious onlookers. Jacob pleaded not guilty, claiming that the murder had been a crime of passion, committed in the heat of the moment after discovering the affair between his brother and niece. His defense team argued that Jacob had been driven to madness by the betrayal of the two people closest to him. Emma, the key witness, was forced to take the stand and recount the details of her relationship with Charles. The prosecution tried to paint her as a victim of manipulation by her uncle, while the defense portrayed her as a willing participant in the illicit affair. Emma's testimony was heart-wrenching, as she described how she had been drawn into the relationship with Charles at a time when she was vulnerable and grieving the loss of her parents. She admitted to loving him, but also acknowledged the guilt and confusion she had felt throughout their time together. The public was divided. Some saw Jacob as a protective patriarch who had snapped when faced with an unforgivable betrayal, while others viewed him as a cold-blooded murderer who had allowed his jealousy and rage to consume him. The media coverage only fueled the controversy, with headlines screaming about the Sinclair scandal and the twisted family affair. The prosecution argued that, regardless of the affair, Jacob had no right to take the law into his own hands and kill his brother. They emphasized the premeditation involved in grabbing the rifle and firing the fatal shot. The fact that Jacob had been drinking heavily that night only added fuel to the prosecution's case, suggesting that he had been out of control and had let his emotions dictate his actions. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury finally reached a verdict. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the foreman stood to deliver the decision. Jacob Sinclair was found guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers as the weight of the decision settled in. Jacob showed little reaction, his face impassive as the sentence was read. Jacob was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. His once powerful and respected name now tarnished forever. He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, leaving behind a family broken beyond repair. Emma, devastated by the loss of both her uncles, one dead, the other incarcerated, was left to pick up the pieces of her life. The town of Maple Ridge, once her sanctuary, had become a place of nightmares. She knew she couldn't stay there, not after everything that had happened. She packed her belongings and left Vermont, hoping to find solace in a fresh start far away from the ghosts of her past. In the years that followed, the Sinclair estate fell into disrepair, a decaying monument to the family's tragic fall. The once grand mansion, with its dark halls and whispered secrets, became a local legend, a place that children dared each other to approach on Halloween. People said the estate was haunted, that the spirits of Charles and Jacob roamed the halls, forever locked in their deadly conflict. The story of the Sinclair family became a cautionary tale, a dark reminder of the consequences of lust, betrayal, and unchecked emotions. Maple Ridge, forever marked by the scandal, moved on, but the memory of the Sinclair tragedy lingered like a stain on the town's history. For Emma, the road to recovery was long and painful. She struggled with the weight of guilt and shame, haunted by the choices she had made and the lives that had been destroyed. Therapy helped her come to terms with what had happened, but the scars ran deep. She changed her name, hoping to escape the notoriety of being a Sinclair, and eventually built a quiet, private life in a small town far from Vermont. As for Jacob, he served his time in prison, a shadow of the man he once was. Behind bars, he had plenty of time to reflect on his actions, though he never publicly expressed remorse for killing Charles. To the end, he maintained that he had acted out of love and protection for his family, even if that love had driven him to murder. Charles, the man at the center of the tragedy, was remembered in different ways by those who knew him. Some saw him as a victim manipulated by his own feelings for Emma. Others saw him as the true villain of the story, a man who had crossed an unforgivable line with his niece, setting in motion the chain of events that led to his own death. Despite the trial and the years that followed, there were still many unanswered questions surrounding the Sinclair family. How long had the affair between Charles and Emma truly been going on? Had Emma been as complicit as she claimed, or had Charles manipulated her into the relationship? And what about Jacob? Had he really acted in a moment of uncontrollable rage, or had he been planning to kill Charles long before that fateful night? The truth, it seemed, was as murky as the shadows that had always surrounded the Sinclair estate. As much as the trial had revealed, there were parts of the story that only the Sinclairs themselves knew, secrets that they would take to their graves. Years after the Sinclair tragedy, the mansion was sold at auction to a developer who had plans to tear it down and build luxury homes on the property. But the town of Maple Ridge never forgot the dark history that had unfolded within those walls. The Sinclair family's legacy of betrayal and murder became part of the town's folklore, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk even in the most respected families. Emma, now in her 30s, had found some semblance of peace. She had married, had children, and built a life far removed from the horrors of her past. But there were still nights when she would wake up in a cold sweat, haunted by the memory of Charles's death and the look in Jacob's eyes as he pulled the trigger. In the end, the Sinclair family was a tragic example of how lust, betrayal, and unchecked emotions can destroy even the strongest bonds. Theirs was a story of forbidden love, of jealousy and rage, and of the devastating consequences that come when family ties are shattered beyond repair. And though the Sinclair estate may have been torn down, its memory, along with the secrets it once held, would never truly die.